Hey everyone, Ethan Godfrey here, and today we're diving deep into the greatest mysteries, the most mind-blowing secrets of human history. Buckle up, because this video will make you question everything you thought you knew. Zeus, Shiva, Thor, Enki. Sound familiar? For thousands of years, ancient mythologies have referred to these figures as gods. They came down from the heavens. They taught humanity agriculture, science, civilization. And get this, some even claim they created humans in their own image. That's right, in their own image. When you dig into the dusty pages of history, you'll find in every era, in every belief system, beings that descend from the sky or ascend back to it. Gods, angels, even holy people. And they all have one thing in common. When they arrive or depart, there are always descriptions of blinding lights, thunderous noises, fire and smoke. And where do they go? Or where do they come from? You guessed it. The stars, the most unreachable magical place for people back then. But hold on, what if these aren't just fairy tales? What if these gods were something far different than what we imagine? These celestial beings, with their superior abilities, their shocking technologies that were beyond the understanding of people at that time, who were they really? Were they just fictional beings, born from the imagination and beliefs of people from that era? Or, and brace yourselves for this one, could the latest archaeological findings and translations of ancient texts be whispering a completely different truth? What if the being we call human was actually genetically designed and created by a much more advanced civilization to make them do their work? In other words, were we created by aliens? We are going to hunt for the answers to these questions together. Now, let's set our course for Çanakkale, Turkey. For the past 150 years, archaeologists have been turning this place upside down. Why? Because they believe that the legendary city of Troy, from the epic tale of the Iliad, is right here. And in 1968, an amateur archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann claimed to have found the very place where the Trojan War occurred. Can you imagine? We're talking about a 3,000-year-old epic written in the 8th century BC. And this epic tells the story of a massive war that took place in these lands, in Çanakkale. For years, all those scientists, those know-it-all professors, they all said, "Nah, that's just a myth." But Schliemann, he didn't listen to them. He unearthed that legendary city in all its glory, in all its mystery. This discovery shook the academic world to its core and brought up this question. If the Iliad is real, could other epics, other myths be real too? Now, let's take a trip to Greece. Every year, thousands of tourists visit the ancient ruins built to honor the gods thousands of years ago. Necropolis, the Temple of Delphi, the Parthenon, the Temple of Apollo. These places were built for those powerful beings who supposedly ruled the world thousands of years ago. When you look at Greek mythology, you see some common details about these gods they worshipped. These beings are depicted as much more imposing, more advanced than humans. They descend from the heavens in various vehicles, and almost all of them have some specific tools with special powers. At first, you might think these descriptions are just the product of the Greeks' imagination, but the latest archaeological digs tell us a different story. These beings are not only present in Greek mythology, but are similarly depicted in almost all cultures of the ancient era. And even though these cultures were separated by thousands of kilometers, and even more surprisingly, by thousands of years, they all incorporated similar beings into their beliefs and cultures, only with different names. Could all of this be a coincidence? Or were all these sky-born gods referring to the same individuals? Our journey takes us to the first known civilization, the ancient Sumerians. This civilization, established around 4000 BC, provides us with very detailed information about these celestial gods, even stating that they lived among them at one point. The Sumerians called these gods who came from the heavens the Anunnaki. If we translate this directly, the word Anunnaki means the heavenly ones, and royal descendants who came from Ki. They then tell us that to lessen their workload, they created mankind in their own image. Yes, you heard that right. The phrase, "we created you in our image," actually appears for the first time in Sumerian mythology, almost 5,000 years before the Abrahamic religions, describing in detail how an alien race created humans in their own image. I would like to read a part of the epic to you. Mix the clay in the heart of nothingness. Good and noble designers will shape the clay. Namu, you will create the limbs. Ninma will work above you. My goddesses will be beside you during the shaping. The fate and appearance of the newborn will be bound to the gods. This is human. In this translation, it is believed that the concept of clay in the first line actually refers to genetic code, but since the Sumerians of that time did not even have a word to explain this, they referred to the creative essence as clay. In the epic of Enuma Elish, there is a passage that goes, "In the clay," meaning in the DNA, humans and gods will be bound together. The soul and body will mature from a god. Thus, this channel will be provided forever. Isn't it astonishing? In the holy books of all monotheistic religions, it is described that God created man in his own image, or created him with his own hands and breathed his soul into him. But when you look at it, you see a more technical, detailed explanation of this event in texts written thousands of years ago. Besides, if you think about it logically, a god who creates humans in his own image must be a humanoid being, right? However, in our faith, we depict the god we call the deity as an infinitely powerful being without any form or gender. If you want to research the subject in more detail, you can examine why concepts such as I, we, he are used in some verses in the Quran. When you look at the event from this perspective, you can find answers to many of your questions. Not only that, the Sumerian civilization we are talking about categorized all the planets in the solar system, recorded the seasonal cycles, the movements of the stars, and even how the Earth was formed, in detail, thousands of years before the invention of the telescope. When you think about it, there is no logical explanation for how they could calculate these at that time. But lo and behold, the reality stands before us. Not just in creation, the Sumerians called the houses they built for their gods ziggurats, and they described in detail how they prepared and took food and drinks that would please the gods to these ziggurats, how the gods would get angry if they didn't like what was offered, how they taught humans agriculture, urbanization, where they extracted gold for the gods, and even how they extracted the blue stone, that is, uranium, that made humans sick but was used by the gods. You can access all this information from the tens of thousands of Sumerian tablets that have been discovered and translated on the internet and in books written on the subject. Let's continue our journey. We are in Greece, Mount Olympus. In mythology, this mountain, called the home of the Greek gods, is where the gods watch over the humans they created and determine their fates. When we examine the epics and stories, we see that the house of the gods on top of Mount Olympus is described as being made of gold and silver, illuminated by bright lights resembling diamonds. In this dazzling house, 12 main gods and goddesses live under the leadership of Zeus. and all of them have a special set of abilities, or rather, weapons. When we examine epics like the Odyssey and the Iliad, we see these weapons in more detail. For example, the leader of the gods, Zeus, holds a lightning bolt described as a lightning weapon. This is such a powerful weapon that when Zeus gets angry, he can destroy an entire city with it. Similarly, Zeus's brother, the god of seas and water, Poseidon, has a trident. According to the epics, Poseidon could create tsunamis and hurricanes with this weapon. But perhaps the most important god for the Greeks was Apollo. Depicted with his chariot that flies in the skies, Apollo taught the Greeks construction techniques, astronomy, and art. Hundreds of years later, when the Roman Empire began to rule Europe and the Mediterranean, they continued to offer thanks to their celestial gods, just like the ancient Greeks. The same beings begin to be mentioned once again in history, under different names. For example, the being called Enlil by the Sumerians and Zeus by the Greeks is called Jupiter by the Romans. Similarly, the Sumerian god of waters, Enki, is called Poseidon by the Greeks and Neptune by the Romans. Just as in these examples, when we gradually go back in history, you will see that these beings only change their names but refer to the same individuals. Roman, Greek, Egyptian, Sumerian. It doesn't matter. These celestial beings are always the same. Today, some academics say that this is preserved through the trade flows that took place in the region over the years. But this claim falls apart when we examine the mythologies of South American and Asian civilizations, which have no connection to the region. The same beings with different names appear again, coming from the skies and teaching people. In Greek mythology, at certain times, Apollo is said to ride his chariot with flying horses that shoot fire, traveling to various parts of the world to teach people other than the Greeks. One of these regions is the ancient city of Hyperborea, located in the Arctic Circle, which is referred to in the epic as the place where the sun never sets. According to legend, Hyperborea is an advanced civilization built by the gods thousands of years ago, before the flood, like the civilizations of Mu and Atlantis. If you pay attention as we delve deeper into the subject, we understand how dozens of historical theories that seem independent of each other are actually connected. We are in the lands of the Maya, one of the ancient civilizations of South America. When we examine the legends of this civilization, which was very advanced in astronomy, stone masonry, urbanization, and agriculture, we encounter the god Kukulkan. According to legend, after the earth faced a great disaster and many countries were submerged underwater, a god came to the Mayan land from the sea in the east, and in an oarless ship. The ancestors of the Mayans learned about the stars and the earth, about building and temples, all from this knowledge. The ship that brought him was likened to a feathered, fire-breathing serpent that turned its long neck to the horizon because of its shape. I think this depiction has brought to mind a person I mentioned a little while ago. Apollo, who teaches people with his flying, fire-breathing chariot, teaches people thousands of kilometers from Greece, his mythological home in South America. If we go back to the similarity of the vehicles used by the gods, two civilizations stand out that perhaps provide us with the most detailed information on this subject: the ancient Norse and the Hindus. Many of you may be familiar with Norse mythology from Marvel movies. Thor's hammer, Odin's spear, the Rainbow Bridge, everything you see in the movies is actually copied from Norse mythology. For example, just like Zeus's lightning weapon, Thor uses the sacred hammer Mjolnir, which also controls lightning. It is described that Odin's spear never misses its target and creates an unstoppable force. It is told in the epics that with the Rainbow Bridge, the gods could take anything from this world to other realms in seconds. Similarly, in Hindu epics such as the Mahabharata, Gita, and Ramayana, there are incredibly powerful weapons used by the gods among themselves or against their enemies. For example, Rama's unstoppable fire-breathing arrow, Brahmastra, which creates the effect of a nuclear bomb where it falls, Shiva's trident Trishul, similar to Poseidon's, and Vishnu's weapon Sudarshana Chakra, which puts everyone it affects to sleep, are just a few examples. The use and effects of hundreds of tools are described in great detail. And it doesn't end there. The epics also mention the sky houses of the gods, which are depicted as hanging in the air. Of course, it was impossible for people of thousands of years ago to understand these kinds of devices, and they had to express what they saw with natural formations. When we read these epics today, with our advanced technology and understanding, we actually encounter technologies that are not unfamiliar to us. Now, I will give you examples from the holy books. Let's start with the Torah, the holy book of the Jews. In the Torah, we encounter a mysterious prophet named Enoch. Although there was a much more detailed section about Prophet Enoch in the Torah in earlier times, these sections were removed from the New Testament during the time of Constantine I on the grounds that they could lead people away from religion. I think you can guess the underlying reason for this. The following lines are all that remains from a whole section about Enoch that was removed from the Torah and the New Testament. God took him with a chariot that spouted fire. Once again, we see a chariot that spouts fire. When we come to the Bible, the story of Prophet Ezekiel and his description of his experience are truly extraordinary. It is said that the heavens parted, and a rotating, amber-colored and textured vehicle that spouted fire descended in front of Ezekiel. By the way, Jews also use the word amber for metallic objects. Keep that in mind. And 4 beings emerged from the vehicle amidst the dust and smoke. In the Bible, these beings are described as having 4 wings, 4 heads, and bodies like polished bronze. In the continuation of his story, Ezekiel tells us that he was taken into the vehicle by these beings and traveled in the skies. So, who were these beings who took Ezekiel and showed him the skies, giving him information about the future? Ezekiel describes these beings as resembling humans, but having things that looked like different animal faces on their heads. Remember, consider the difficulty a person who lived 2,600 years ago would have in trying to explain technology. Ezekiel, as best as he could, has told us about perhaps the oldest and most detailed alien abduction case, and even depicted it this way. When we come to the Quran, similar stories appear in several different ways. Remember the meeting of Muhammad with Gabriel, whom he described as a being of light in the Hira cave. In fact, the event described as the Miraj is almost identical to the experience of Prophet Ezekiel. The prophet says he rode a mount called Burak with Gabriel. The meaning of the word Burak is that which brings closer to Allah, and it is derived from the Arabic word Burq, which means to flash like lightning and to shine. Once again, we have a shining, flashing, and flying vehicle. Coincidence? If you have watched the video this far, you now understand that there is no such thing as coincidence. Gabriel and Muhammad travel at high speeds around the world with this vehicle, and then the vehicle ascends, taking the Prophet up to the presence of Allah. Apart from these, in Islam, you can also find information about extraterrestrial beings in the Quran, such as jinns and angels. Keep in mind that here the word jinn means those who are not from here, foreigners, and the word angel means holy messenger from the sky, owners, kings. But there is a surah that makes things even more detailed, the Surah An-Najm, which means the star. In this surah, warnings are given to those who worshipped Lat, Uzza, and Manat before Islam, reminding Muslims that those who worshipped these beings could not be saved from their sins, because the lord of both these beings and the star Sirius, which was considered the home of these beings and worshipped as holy, was Allah. This is a very important point. Most people might think that Lat, Uzza, and Manat were just 3 ordinary stone idols in the Kaaba of that time. However, the word idol means an idol that symbolizes a god. So it was not the stone they worshipped, but a real being that the stone symbolized. The being worshipped as Lat is the goddess Athena in Greek mythology, and her name in the Sumerian belief is Inanna, one of the ruling Anunnaki. Uzza appears in history as Aphrodite, and interestingly, again, as the Sumerian goddess Inanna. Similarly, when we trace back in history, the origin of Manat is also the Sumerian Anunnaki Inanna. So these 3 idols, which were worshipped as the daughters of Allah in those times, are actually the same being. Thus, you have seen how even just one main character can transform from culture to culture, from religion to religion over thousands of years. And the Quran tells us that the Lord of these Anunnaki, who have been worshipped as deities for thousands of years, is also the Lord who is God. That is, the being known to most of us today by the name Allah. We continue to delve into the depths of history and mythology, and this time we encounter celestial gods and their relationships with humans. If any of you are fond of mythology, you might have understood what these relationships generally encompass: romantic relationships. Ancient epics are full of stories of gods from the sky having sexual relations with humans. After these relationships, we encounter the children of the god, demigods, and beings called Nephilim. Once again, we have ordinary beings presented as gods, but acting with human impulses, primarily lust. After all, it is absurd to think that a being who created the entire universe would be fixated on human women due to passion and lust. The children born from these relationships are described as having superior qualities, being more intelligent and stronger than normal humans, and it was claimed that those who carried this bloodline were of the ruling class. It is precisely for this reason that for thousands of years, from pharaohs to kings, everyone in the ruling class has claimed, even if they were not, that their lineage and blood came from these celestial beings and their demigod children. In fact, if you have read the Torah, you will see how the Israelites presented themselves as being from this lineage. Over thousands of years, this has taken such a perverse form that it led to royal or elite families in Europe during the monarchical period to engage in consanguineous marriages, just so that, according to their beliefs, this pure bloodline would not be corrupted. The reason why the Jews, as I mentioned earlier, do not marry outside their own race is precisely because of this. Although this has started to change today, if you are a conservative Jewish family, you cannot marry someone who is not Jewish and outside your lineage. The last topic I will touch on is why these beings suddenly withdrew from the planet. It is said that in their time, for regional administrations, the children of the Anunnaki fought very serious wars among themselves. I will have to summarize this topic because it is a video subject in itself. As I mentioned earlier, the Anunnaki lived on this earth for a very long time, and naturally their children and grandchildren began to emerge, and they distributed these lineages to control human groups in various regions. However, over time, the lower Anunnaki began to fight among themselves to claim rights in each other's territories, driven by a greater lust for power, and as a result of this destructive war, the Middle East region became almost uninhabitable, and millions of people died. Thereupon, the leader of the Anunnaki, Anu, ordered all Anunnakis to withdraw from the earth, and leave the planet to humans. And these gods, or aliens, who had been among us for thousands of years, quickly disappeared from people's lives. Subsequently, civilizations gradually re-established themselves. Those who claimed to be of this sacred lineage formed the ruling class and began to continue the customs of the gods in their own way. When people stopped receiving commands from their gods as they used to, they thought they had angered them, so they started to build altars and temples at every corner and try to communicate with their gods. As a result of this futile effort, the clergy began to emerge, and unfortunately, over time, they became corrupt, exploiting the people. With the increase of ignorance over time, the belief system, which was based on a few main gods, turned into an identification of everything with a god: the harvest god, the rain god, the flower god, the volcano god, etc. They associated all the natural cycles they could not explain with the god and moved away from scientific development. And now, with our developing technology and scientific understanding today, you can see for yourselves how these superstitious beliefs are beginning to collapse. Concepts like fire worship and idol worship are almost non-existent. According to current figures, it is predicted that even monotheistic religious systems will gradually disappear within the next century. However, belief will continue as long as humans exist. What they will transform into, after all this disappears and evolves, we will have to wait and see. As I said at the beginning, even events that seem to have no connection to each other are actually very tightly connected. Humanity has now begun to slowly unravel the details of these knots. In fact, most of the topics I talked about deserve particular attention, and each of them can be a topic of a separate video. For now, I decided to start with a comprehensive summary. In my next videos, I will discuss the topics I just mentioned one by one and share them with you in much more detail. To join me in unraveling more secrets of history and mystery, do not forget to subscribe to my channel and stay tuned. See you in the next video. Take care.